The father's justice. My son took his whole family to Disney and left my 8-year-old granddaughter behind like she didn't belong. I was asleep. The kind of deep, quiet sleep that only comes after a long week, when my phone lit up the nightstand at 2-3 a.m. I didn't even need to check the time twice. Nothing good ever comes through a phone at that hour. My name is Henry Wallace. I'm 67 years old, and I spent most of my life learning how to read situations before they fall apart. Still, the name on the screen made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years. Emily. I answered before the second ring. Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong? There was a pause, not silence, not exactly. More like the sound of someone trying to breathe through something too big for them. I sat up slowly, pushing my glasses on with one hand, already swinging my feet toward the floor. I'm here. You're okay. Just talk to me. They left. 2 words. Quiet. Flat. Like she'd already said them too many times to herself. I frowned, still trying to catch up. Who left, honey? Daddy, Claire, and Tyler. Her voice broke on the last name, not loud, just enough to hear the crack in it. They went to Florida, to Disney World. I stood up fully now, the room still dark except for the blue light of the phone in my hand. The hallway outside my bedroom was empty, quiet in that heavy way a house gets when it's been lived in alone for too long. Okay, slow down. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. They said it didn't make sense to take me, she whispered. They said I have school, but Tyler doesn't either. And she stopped, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Emily, why didn't they take me, Grandpa? The question hung there, thin and fragile, like it might break if I answered it wrong. I leaned one hand against the dresser, steadying myself, staring at nothing in particular, just the outline of the room, barely visible in the dark. 31 years of family law, and I had never heard a question that felt this small and this heavy at the same time. You didn't do anything wrong, I said carefully. Do you hear me? Not one thing. Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear her trying not to cry again. They said I'd be fine here, she added, softer now. Mrs. Patterson knows, and there's food, but she still called me at 2 in the morning. I looked at the clock again. 2:06 a.m., doing the math without thinking. Distance, time, options, old habits that never really leave. I'm right here, I told her. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out, okay? She didn't answer right away, just breathed, uneven, like she was deciding whether to believe me. And then, very quietly, okay. I stayed on the line until her breathing slowed, until the silence felt less sharp. But even then, something about it didn't sit right, something that didn't match the simple explanation I'd been given. Because people don't call you at 2 in the morning, unless something deeper has already been happening for a long time. I didn't go back to bed. The moment the call ended, something in me had already decided, not slowly, not emotionally, just a quiet, fixed decision that didn't ask permission. I walked into my office, turned on the small desk lamp, and pulled open the bottom drawer where I kept things I didn't use anymore but never threw away. My hands moved without hesitation. Wallet, keys, an old leather folder, the kind I used to carry into courtrooms. I checked the time again, 2:14 a.m. I dialed George Dalton next. He picked up on the first ring, voice steady, like it wasn't the middle of the night. Henry? I need a favor, I said. No explanation, just the tone. A brief pause. Then, how long? I don't know yet. Is that your granddaughter? Yes. I'll be over in 10 minutes. That was George, never asking the wrong questions. I hung up, booked the earliest flight I could find out of Decatur, fingers moving faster than my thoughts. 6:20 a.m. Atlanta, close enough. The confirmation email came through as I stood there in the quiet light, the house still dark, except for that single lamp casting a narrow circle on the desk. George arrived exactly when he said he would. I handed him the spare key at the front door, neither of us stepping fully inside. Call me if anything comes up, he said. I will, He gave a small nod, then turned back toward his truck, boots crunching lightly on the gravel. No more words than necessary. By 5:30, I was at the airport. Fluorescent lights too bright, the floor freshly cleaned, the smell of coffee drifting from a kiosk that had just opened. People moved around me with carry-ons and half-awake expressions. Routine, normal, none of them knowing that somewhere, a child had been left behind and told it made sense. I sat at the gate, elbows on my knees, phone in my hand, staring at nothing in particular. The explanation I'd been given, school, timing, convenience, it didn't hold up under even a few seconds of thought. Tyler didn't have school either. Emily had still called me, and she hadn't sounded confused. She'd sounded used to it. That was the part that stayed with me. When they called boarding, I stood without checking my seat again. Walked down the narrow aisle of the plane, the overhead bins clicking open and shut above me. The seatbelt light came on. The engine noise built slowly, and as the plane began to move, I found myself replaying her voice in my head, not what she said, but how she said it. And somewhere between the runway and the sky, a quiet thought settled in, one I couldn't shake. This wasn't about one trip, was it? The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Beige siding, trimmed hedges, a quiet street where everything seemed in place. But the moment I stepped inside, something shifted, not loud, not obvious, just a subtle sense that things weren't lining up the way they should. The air smelled faintly of detergent and something sweet, like candles that had burned too long. The living room was tidy, almost too tidy. Cushions aligned, surfaces clear, no signs of anything out of place. I set my bag down by the door and walked slowly toward the hallway. Light filtered in from the kitchen window behind me, stretching across the floor in long, pale lines. That's when I noticed the photos. A row of framed pictures lined the wall, arranged carefully, evenly spaced, the kind of display meant to tell a story. I stepped closer. Mark and Claire, smiling at what looked like a canyon overlook. Tyler, in a baseball uniform, dirt on his knees, grinning straight into the camera. A birthday photo, balloons behind him, cake lit, everyone leaning in. Another one, Christmas, matching red sweaters, all three of them standing close together. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. End. I kept going. 11 frames in total. I slowed down, leaning in slightly, scanning each image more carefully this time, not just who was there, but who wasn't. Emily appeared twice. The first one was a school photo, slightly off-center in the frame, like it had been adjusted after it was printed. The second was a group picture, Christmas again, but different. She stood at the far edge, half a step behind the others, wearing a blue sweater that didn't match the rest. Her arms were close to her sides, not touching anyone, not quite part of the formation. I reached out, adjusting the frame just slightly so it sat straight. It had been tilted, not enough to notice at first glance, but enough. From the kitchen, I could hear a faint clinking sound, something small being moved, then set down again. I didn't call out. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the spacing between the frames, the placement. The ones with Tyler were centered, eye level, easy to see from across the room. Emily's was lower, closer to the corner, where the light didn't hit as directly. Small things, but not random. I moved a step back, taking it all in at once, the symmetry, the choices, the quiet decisions that had been made over time. No one plans these things out loud, but they happen anyway, piece by piece. The house didn't feel empty. It felt arranged. And standing there in that narrow hallway, with the morning light barely reaching the last frame on the wall, I realized I hadn't heard Emily say a single word yet. But I already knew something wasn't right, and the deeper I looked, the harder it became to believe this had only started recently. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, a small paperback workbook open in front of her, one of those with word searches and simple puzzles. The overhead light cast a soft yellow circle across the table, leaving the corners of the room dim. Emily didn't look up right away, just kept tracing a line with her pencil, slow and careful. like she was trying to stay focused on something that made sense. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The wood creaked slightly under my weight. "Hey," I said quietly. She nodded once, still looking at the page. "Hi, Grandpa." I waited a moment, long enough for the room to settle. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. "You want to tell me about the trip?" I asked, keeping my voice even, not pushing, just opening the door. Her pencil stopped moving. "They left Tuesday night," she said after a few seconds. "After dinner." She turned the page, though she hadn't finished the puzzle. "Daddy said it was for Tyler's birthday, but his birthday isn't until October." I didn't interrupt. "They said it didn't make sense to take me," she continued, pressing the pencil a little harder now, the tip scratching lightly against the paper. "Because I have school on Monday," a small pause. "But Tyler doesn't either." She erased something, even though there was nothing written there. "I didn't say anything this time," she added. "Why not?" I asked. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped. "Because last time I asked, Claire said I was being selfish." She kept her eyes down. "And Daddy didn't talk to me for a couple of days after that." The pencil rolled out of her fingers and stopped near the edge of the table. She didn't reach for it. I leaned back slightly, resting my hands together. "Last time, meaning this has happened before?" She nodded, small, almost automatic. "More than once." I let the silence sit there for a moment, not filling it too quickly. "Can you tell me about one of those times?" I asked. Emily pulled her knees up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around them. "In September, they went camping, just Tyler and them." She glanced up briefly, then back down again. "They told me I had a sleepover that weekend, but it got canceled." "And you stayed here?" "With Mrs. Patterson next door." She said it plainly, like it was routine. I exhaled slowly, keeping my face neutral. "Anything else?" She hesitated this time, longer than before. The light above us flickered once, then steadied. "At Christmas, we took pictures at the mall." Her voice softened. "They all had matching red sweaters." She tugged lightly at the sleeve of her shirt, as she could still feel it. "Mine didn't come in time, so I wore my school one." I pictured the frame in the hallway without needing to look at it again. "It's okay, though," she added quickly. "I stood on the side, so it didn't mess it up." "Didn't mess it up." I watched her hands tighten slightly around her arms. "Emily," I said gently, "has anyone ever told you why things are done this way?" She shook her head, slow, uncertain. "Claire says I'm just more sensitive than Tyler." A faint shrug. "She says I take things too personally." I didn't respond right away. The refrigerator clicked off behind me, leaving the room quieter than before. Emily picked up the pencil again, but didn't go back to the page. Instead, she turned it between her fingers, over and over, like she was trying to keep them busy. "It's not a big deal," she said after a moment, softer now. "I'm used to it." I sat there, watching her say that like it was something normal, something expected, and that was the part that stayed with me. Because kids don't get used to being left out, not unless it's been happening long enough for them to stop asking why. And that made me wonder, just how many times had she already stopped asking? I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there at the table, watching her turn that pencil between her fingers and let the pieces settle into place, not as separate moments, but as something connected. One trip, maybe that could be explained. Two, maybe timing. But the way she told it, the way each memory slid into the next without surprise, it didn't sound like accidents. It sounded practiced. "Hey," I said after a moment, keeping my voice light, "tell me about your birthday this year." She looked up, a little caught off guard by the shift. "March," she said. "We had cake at home." A small pause. "Chocolate. Daddy got it from the store on the corner." "Did you have a party?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, just us." Her eyes moved briefly toward the hallway, then back to the table. "I heard them talking the night before. Claire said maybe we should do something bigger, but Daddy said they already did Tyler's big birthday last year, and it was too expensive to do that every time." I nodded slowly, not reacting outwardly, just letting the words land. Tyler's birthday, October. Last year. Emily's, March. This year. Same house, same parents, different standards. What did Tyler do for his birthday? I asked. Her face shifted slightly, not jealous, just careful. They went to Great Wolf Lodge, she said. He had a cake there, and his friends came. She hesitated, then added, "It looked fun." I rested my forearms on the table, fingers loosely laced together. "How about your school play? The one your teacher emailed me about?" Her shoulders straightened a little at that. "I had 7 lines," she said quietly. I was the narrator. There was a hint of pride there, small, but real. "Did Mark and Claire come?" She looked down again, tracing the edge of the workbook with her nail. "Daddy came for a little bit," she said, "but he had to leave early. Tyler had hockey practice." A short pause. Claire stayed with Tyler. The room felt still, like everything had slowed just enough to notice the pattern forming. "And Christmas," I said, more to myself than to her. "The photos." She gave a small nod. "They wanted everyone to match," she said. "But mine didn't come in time." She smoothed the front of her shirt without thinking, the same motion she must have made that day. So I stood on the side. I could see it clearly now. Not just the picture on the wall, but the decision behind it. Not rushed, not chaotic, just quietly accepted. I leaned back in the chair, eyes moving toward the doorway that led to the hallway of frames. Birthday, school play, holidays, trips, different situations, same result. No raised voices, no obvious conflict, just a steady, consistent shift in who was centered and who was not. This wasn't one bad decision, or even a series of them. It was a pattern, repeated often enough that an 8-year-old had already learned how to adjust herself around it. And sitting there in that quiet kitchen, with the late afternoon light stretching across the floor, I realized I wasn't looking at a misunderstanding anymore. I was looking at something that had been built, piece by piece, over time, and no one had stopped it. I didn't raise my voice, didn't confront anyone, didn't even ask another question right away. Instead, I stood up from the table, walked back into the hallway, and stopped in front of those frames again. The light had shifted slightly now, softer, angled, catching the glass just enough to reflect my outline over their images. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. No hesitation. I started with the first frame, held the camera steady, clicked, then the next, and the next, moving down the line one by one. I didn't rush it. Each photo stayed on the screen long enough for me to register the details: who stood where, who leaned in, who was centered, and who wasn't. The sound of the shutter was quiet, almost swallowed by the stillness of the house. When I finished, I stepped back and checked the images quickly, making sure they were clear. Then I opened the recorder. It was an old habit, something I hadn't needed in years, but my hand found the button without thinking. I held it close, just below chest level, and spoke in a low, even voice. "Thursday, approximately 5:15 p.m., Whitmore Drive." I paused briefly, glancing at the frames again. 11 photographs displayed in the main hallway. Subject Emily Wallace appears in 2, both positioned at the outer edges of the visual layout, one inconsistent in attire with the rest of the family unit. I clicked it off. No emotion in the recording, just facts. That was the rule. Facts hold up. Feelings don't. From the kitchen, I could hear Emily turning a page, the soft rustle of paper, then the faint tap of her pencil against the table. Normal sounds, ordinary, but they carried differently now. Every small detail had weight. I walked back in and sat down across from her again, placing my phone face down on the table. My posture stayed relaxed, shoulders loose, voice steady. Nothing about this moment needed to feel like pressure. Not for her. "You're good at those," I said, nodding toward the workbook. She gave a small shrug, circled a word, then glanced up. "They're easy." "Easy's good," I said. "Means you don't have to think too hard." She nodded, then went back to the page. I leaned back slightly in the chair, watching the room instead of her. The way the light hit the counter, the clock above the stove ticking softly, the stillness that settled in between movements. My mind wasn't racing, it wasn't angry, it was organizing. That's what years in a courtroom teach you. When something doesn't feel right, you don't react, you document. You let the picture build itself piece by piece until it can't be ignored. I glanced at the hallway again, then back at the table, then at the phone resting under my hand. Because if this was a pattern, if it really had been happening the way it looked, then this wasn't just something you noticed. It was something you proved. My phone started lighting up just after noon. I was standing by the kitchen sink, rinsing out a glass, when it buzzed across the counter. Mark's name on the screen. I let it ring. The sound echoed lightly in the quiet room, then stopped. A minute later, it started again. Same name, same pattern. I dried my hand slowly on a towel and turned the phone face down. Emily was in the other room, the soft scratch of her pencil coming and going in uneven bursts. I waited until the house settled again before I picked the phone up. 4 missed calls, 1 voicemail. I pressed play. "Hey, Dad, it's me." Mark's voice came through, casual at first. Like this was a scheduling issue, not a child left behind. "I'm guessing Emily called you. Look, it's not what it sounds like. Just call me back, okay?" I didn't move. I let the message end on its own. Another notification. 2nd voicemail. "Dad, come on. I know you're there. A little tighter now. Impatience slipping in. Still no question. Still nothing about her." I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and played the 3rd. This time it was Claire. "We just want you to know Emily's fine. Mrs. Patterson next door is checking in. There's food in the fridge. She has her tablet." Her voice was controlled, rehearsed almost, like she'd already explained this to herself enough times to believe. "We'll be back Sunday and we can talk then." I stared at the phone for a moment before starting the last message. Background noise came through first. Music, distant voices, something upbeat and crowded. Mark again. "Dad, listen. Don't make this into a whole thing. Emily's okay. You being there actually helps. She loves you." A pause. Then, quieter, like he was stepping away from someone. "Just keep her calm, all right? She gets dramatic sometimes." I lowered the phone slowly, placing it flat on the counter. Dramatic. The word didn't echo. It just settled. Heavy and still. I glanced toward the hallway, then toward the living room where Emily sat, small, quiet, working through a puzzle like nothing had happened. No one had asked if she was scared. No one had asked if she slept. Not one message started with, "Is she okay?" I walked over to the table and pulled out a chair, sitting down without making a sound. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, steady, indifferent. I picked up the phone again, scrolling through the messages, reading the timestamps, spacing, tone. Not concern, not urgency, just management. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just distance or distraction. It was something colder, something chosen. So the question wasn't why they left her behind. The question was, how long had they stopped seeing her there at all? I didn't call him back. Not that afternoon, not that evening. I set the phone on the counter face down and let the silence do its work. There's a point in situations like this where words don't clarify anything. They just give people time to reshape the story. I had no interest in hearing a better version of what I'd already seen. Instead, I moved to the dining table and opened my laptop. The screen lit up the room in a cool, steady glow, the kind that sharpens focus. I pulled a legal pad closer, uncapped a pen, and wrote the date at the top of the page. My handwriting stayed even, controlled, the same way it had been for decades. De facto custodianship. I sat back for a moment, letting the phrase settle. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fast, but it was precise. The law doesn't move on outrage, it moves on pattern, consistency, evidence, and now I had the beginning of all three. From the other room, I could hear Emily shifting in her chair, the faint creak of wood, the soft thud of something being set down, ordinary sounds, grounding. I kept working. I outlined the timeline first. Recent trip, prior trip, holidays, school events. Each one spaced out, not rushed. Just enough detail to show repetition without forcing it. Then I listed observations, documented facts only, no assumptions, no conclusions. That comes later. So, I paused, then reached for my phone again, opening the photo gallery. One by one, I reviewed the images I'd taken in the hallway, checking angles, clarity, placement. Satisfied, I attached them to a folder, labeled, dated, organized, habit, not emotion. The cursor blinked on the screen as I started drafting the petition. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, not fast, not slow, just consistent. Years of practice settle into muscle memory like that. Every sentence built on the last, clean, direct, impossible to misread. At some point, the overhead light dimmed slightly as the sun shifted outside. Shadows stretched across the floor, reaching toward the table. I didn't turn another lamp on. I didn't need to. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger moves too quickly, makes mistakes. This was something else, measured, deliberate, quiet. In the other room, Emily laughed once, soft, brief, like she'd found something in her puzzle that made sense. I glanced up, just for a second, then back to the screen. Because by the time Mark and Claire came back, this wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a position already set, already moving. They walked in just after 4, the front door opening with that familiar click, followed by the soft thud of luggage wheels crossing the threshold. I was standing in the kitchen, one hand resting on the back of a chair, watching the reflection of the entryway in the microwave door. Bright colors came in first, souvenir bags, a pair of Mickey ears hanging loosely from Claire's hand, then their voices, lighter than the room felt. "Emily?" Mark called out, stepping inside. There was a pause, not long but noticeable, like he expected an answer to come quickly. She was at the table, workbook open, pencil in hand. She didn't turn around. I stayed where I was. Claire glanced toward me first, her smile tightening slightly as she set her bag down. "Henry, we should probably talk." "We will," I said, evenly. "But not yet." Mark took a step forward, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure where to stand. "Hey, Em, we're back," he tried again, softer this time. "She hears you," I said, still not raising my voice. "Whether she answers is up to her." That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped, just a fraction. I reached over to the counter, picked up the manila envelope I had set there earlier, smooth, unmarked except for the fold at the top. I held it out toward him without stepping closer. "Before we talk," I said, "you should read this." He hesitated, then took it. His fingers brushed the edge, feeling the weight of it before he even opened it. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the low hum of the refrigerator behind me. "What is it?" Claire asked, her voice sharper now. Mark didn't answer right away. He slid the clasp open slowly, pulled the papers free, and looked down. His eyes moved across the first page, then stopped. Not dramatically, just a stillness that hadn't been there before. "This is," he began, but didn't finish. "A petition," I said, "filed 2 days ago." Claire stepped closer, trying to read over his shoulder. "You filed something?" Her tone shifted, less controlled now. I didn't move. "I documented what I needed to document," I said, "and I submitted it." Mark lowered himself into the chair by the door, without looking away from the paper. The motion wasn't sudden, just slow, like his body had made the decision before his mind caught up. "You went to court?" he asked quietly. "Yes." Claire's hand came up to her mouth for a moment, not fully covering it, just enough to interrupt her breathing. "Henry, you can't just—" "I didn't just," I said, cutting in, calm, precise. "I followed a process." The word hung there, process, not emotion, not reaction, something structured, already in motion. Mark flipped to the next page, then back again, like he was trying to make sure it hadn't changed between readings. His eyes moved faster now, scanning, stopping, returning. "I don't understand," he said, though it sounded more like he did. "You will." I replied. Behind him, Emily finally shifted in her chair, the faint scrape of wood against tile. No one turned toward her. Not yet. Claire took a step back, her gaze moving between me and the papers in Mark's hands. "This isn't necessary," she said, quieter now, but less certain. "We can talk about this." "We are talking," I said. Mark looked up then, really looked, like he was seeing me differently than when he walked in. The room felt smaller somehow, tighter, every sound clearer than it should have been. And for the first time since they stepped through that door, neither of them knew what to say next, which left only one question. What happens when the conversation is already decided before it even begins? The courtroom was smaller than people expect. No dramatic lights, no raised voices, just rows of wooden benches, a steady overhead hum, and a judge who had seen more than any of us in that room. I sat at the table with Susan Parker to my right, a thin stack of papers aligned neatly in front of me. Across the aisle, Mark sat alone, hands folded, eyes lowered. Claire was beside him, quiet in a way that felt different from before. Emily sat just behind me, feet not quite touching the floor, hands resting in her lap. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't looking around, just watching. When my name was called, I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the tile as I stepped forward. No speeches, no raised tone, just facts, dates, patterns, documentation. The photographs, the recorded notes, the timeline that didn't argue, didn't accuse, just showed. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally glancing down to make a note, then back up again. When it was Mark's turn, he stood slower, like the weight of the moment had finally caught up to him. He didn't argue, didn't deny. He spoke quietly, said he loved his daughter, said he hadn't realized how it had become this, that he didn't have an explanation that made sense anymore. No one filled the silence that followed. The decision came without delay. The judge's voice was calm, measured, the kind that doesn't need emphasis to carry weight. Custodianship granted, effective, immediately. I didn't react outwardly, just nodded once, sat back down, and let the words settle where they needed to. Outside, the late afternoon light had shifted, softer now, casting long lines across the courthouse steps. The air felt still, like everything had paused, just long enough to mark the change. Emily walked beside me, close but not holding on. Her steps, small, steady. We reached the car before she spoke. "Grandpa," she said, looking straight ahead, "am I your first choice?" I stopped with my hand on the door, the metal warm under my palm. For a second, the sounds of the street faded. Passing cars, distant voices, all of it pulled back. I turned toward her. "You're not my first choice," I said, keeping my voice even, clear. "You're my only choice." She looked up at me then, not surprised, just certain, like something had finally lined up the way it was supposed to. We got in the car without another word. The engine started, the dashboard lights came on, and I pulled out slowly into the street. The road ahead wasn't complicated, just unfamiliar in a different way. Here's the truth. Family isn't defined by who gets included when it's convenient. It's defined by who gets chosen, consistently, even when no one's watching. And if you've ever been in a position where someone made you feel like an afterthought, you already know how quiet that kind of damage can be. If this story meant something to you, if you've seen a situation like this before, take a second and let me know. A simple like, a comment. It helps more than you think. And I'd really like to hear your perspective. Because sometimes the hardest question isn't what happened. It's this. When someone shows you who matters to them, do you believe them the first time, or do you wait until it costs something real?